Hello, bonjour, namaste, ni hao, and ohio, everybody. What is going on? It is Galeriot here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel once again for another Danmachi Memoria Freese video. And today we are going to be talking about the 6th anniversary part 2 story. I've read the in-game adaptation, I've read the light novels, and now we're going to bring it all together and talk about it in this video. So, of course, if you guys want to enjoy it, please be sure to leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel for more Danmachi and Danmemo content, and let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think about the story? Do you guys like it? Do you guys think some things could have been done better? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm very curious to read your comments regarding the part 2 story. Now, before we get in, two things I'd like to mention. The first being, I want to give a big shout out to Gacha Ampas. He's uploaded the entire part 2 story as well as obviously the part 1 story on his YouTube channel, making it super accessible for everybody to watch it, including those who don't play Danmemo. So I would urge you guys to go and watch it if you can't play the game, or if you aren't able to read the game story in game, of course, right? This is a great way for you to watch it entirely without any issues. He's done a fantastic job in uploading all these stories. So big shout outs to him once again. And the second thing I would like to mention is that I have reacted to the story live on stream as well as on video. I basically took the stream and made it its own video as well. So you guys can watch the video itself. It's a 1 hour, 19 to 20 minute video basically of me just watching the entire story. And then of course, there is also a live stream where I also talk about the story a little bit after the recording is done basically, and it's not in video format, it's only in the live stream. So you guys can go watch both if you guys want to. Of course, there is no pressure on you guys to go and watch it, but it would be truly appreciated. At least leave a like and come back here. That's the bare minimum you guys can do. But let's talk about the story. Let's talk about the part 2 story, because I feel like a lot of people have differing opinions regarding the story. I mean, while I was streaming, actually, I'll talk about some people's thoughts on, you know, the part 2 story when I was streaming, as well as some people's thoughts when I finished streaming and I actually spoke to them in Discord as well. So a couple of people really liked the story and the direction they went with part 2. They didn't overly change a bunch of part 2 as we may have thought that might have happened, especially considering, you know, during the interview with Amori Sensei and the Danmemo development team, they said, for Danmachi Online, by the way, I didn't interview them, I should clarify. I didn't interview them, Danmachi Online interviewed them. But in that interview, they mentioned that, you know, there are some spoilery things in part 2 that they can't mention in those interviews. So they said that we will talk about that in part 3 of the interview, which I hope we get sometime this week or next week maybe. But they said that we can't spoil it. We cannot spoil it. We cannot talk about it. We will save it for the next part of the interview where we can talk about spoilers more freely. And of course, there are certain things that were completely unexpected, and I will talk about them later on in this video because I feel like they're the most impactful changes, I feel. And I'm going to go in terms of scaling basically. So we're going to start off with the things that didn't really impact the story that much, then the medium thing, and then the big thing that came out, of course, at the end of part 2 story. But first and foremost, I'd like to say that a lot of people apparently told me that, you know, well, I say a lot of people, but apparently somebody said in the Discord, in the Danmachi Memoria Freese Reddit Discord, somebody told me that a lot of people were apparently expecting that part 1 and part 2 would be Sword Art Oratoria 12, the entirety of SO 12, and then part 3 would be something completely original. And I just replied to that person, and I'm gonna say it right here, is that I am surprised people expected that. I don't know why people were expecting that necessarily. I've been saying for the longest that all 3 parts I expect to be SO 12. I even said it, I think, right before part 2 released, and a couple of weeks before part 2 released, I said that part 1 is what we got, 170 pages, nearly 60% of the book, right? And then the next part will be probably chapter 7, which was, of course, the penultimate chapter in the book. And then part 3 will be chapter 8 and the epilogue. That's it. That's how they're gonna do the last 2 parts. That's what I expected. And then of course I said that they would add some original content as well, which they of course have. But some people were apparently expecting part 3 to be completely original, completely brand new content. And for me, I think that wouldn't have made sense, especially if it was a continuation, because, well, after SO 12 comes SO 13 and of course volume 15 and 16 of Danmachi's main series, right? So you've got those things already carrying forward, and we know they're not going to adapt those in this anniversary. There is no shot that that was going to happen, to be quite honest. So the next best option was something from the past, and this is something that I've even potentially thought about as well. I even spoke about it when, SO12 was first announced, and I said that, I don't believe SO12 is long enough for a 3-part anniversary, and this part kind of shows that in a way, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, because of course, I felt like it was 1 volume, a Stray Record, a 3-volume light novel now was 3 parts when it first came out, right? And then of course Argonaut, it's 2 volumes they're releasing for Argonaut as light novel format. That was 2 parts. SO12 is 1 volume, a long volume. Admittingly, it's a 300-page light novel, but it is still only 1 volume. And so I was just like, it's going to have to be stretched quite a bit. They're gonna have to add a couple of things, and they have so far, right? In part 1, we saw the anti-curse armor scene, of course, Line being alive and building up that armor and everything. We got to see some additional lines and stuff, but that was the majority of changes. Outside of that, it was more or less the same as the light novel. Part 2 only covered 30 pages. I will say that already. It only covered 30 pages of the light novel, which I was kind of surprised by. It didn't even cover the entirety of chapter 7, which was surprising to me, to be quite honest. I wasn't expecting them to just cut it off at like 3/4 of the way through of chapter 7. I thought they would have finished off chapter 7 and then moved on to chapter 8 in the next part. But the next part, we're gonna have about 80 pages to go, because of course the last 10 pages is always like Omori's afterwards, the status pages and stuff like that, right, in the SO12 light novel. So we have about 80 pages to go for part 3, not to mention whatever they think is good to add as original content for part 3. So part 3 will be its normal length, but because this was only 30 pages covered, it was only 11 chapters. It wasn't even that long of a part 2. And this is something a lot of people additionally added on, was that they thought part 2 was weak. And we'll come on to that point in just a moment. But basically, part 2 was only 11 chapters in game, of course, right? And a lot of people said that, they would have thought that part 3 could have been something original, right? And I obviously said at the start of the video, like, them doing a sequel or continuation wouldn't have made much sense. I don't think it makes sense at all. But the next idea was that they could have revisited the past, and this is something that I thought about as well, and I kind of teased as well, that they could do potentially, right? They could go back in time and potentially look at certain things and certain aspects as a way to kind of make an expose, kind of bring more exposition into the story. But the more I thought about it, right, the more I didn't know what they could have done if they went back into the past, because first and foremost, that person who talked to me about this whole point, they said that they could have done something with Revis and Nidhogg, right? So let's talk about Revis first and foremost. I personally don't think Revis has enough for us to give her a backstory. Of course, if she was that whole thing where Omori Sensei was planning on making Revis Elise and everything, maybe then. But even then, we already know the backstory of Elise. Maybe we could have seen the transformation and everything, kind of like we did Philvis in part 1. That would have been cool. But at the same time, right now, Revis doesn't make much sense to give a backstory to, because we've seen her character. We obviously saw in part 1 what Ice thinks of Revis and how she treats Revis. And Revis also doubles down on that fact of what character she is. She's a creature at the end of the day. Maybe we could have seen some backstory on how she became Revis, of course, right? The Revis that we know now. But I feel like it wouldn't have been that interesting, considering all things said and done. I don't think it would have been made much sense, to be quite honest, especially considering if it's after the events of Sword Oratoria part 12, after the events of part 2. I don't think it would have made sense if everything was adapted in part 2. That being said, right, I shouldn't specify that. If it was everything that was adapted, everything of SO12 was adapted in part 2, I don't think tackling Revis's backstory would have made sense whatsoever. I don't think anybody would have cared, to be quite honest. On the other side, doing Nidhogg, while I think that would have been amazing, and I think it would have been really, really sick, the more I thought about it, and I think I spoke about this a while back actually as well, and I said that maybe if they did something like that would be kind of cool. But the more I thought about it, right, you have to remember that it is an Age of Heroes story at the end of the day, and we've seen the last 2 Age of Heroes stories, the Argonaut story and Knights of Fianna stories, required a lot of exposition and a lot of time and effort and a lot of writing, and I don't think that would have fit in part 3 alone, right? I don't think it would have fit in part 3 alone. So Nidhogg as well, for me personally, didn't make much sense whatsoever as a doing it as a past thing, because I feel like it would have been a pretty weak throwback. You know, it would have been a pretty weak story because you only have one part for to include everything, to be quite honest. So I don't think it would have made much sense there either. In terms of other things that they could have done in terms of revisiting the past, I don't really know, to be quite honest. I don't know what else they could have probably done, to be honest, in terms of going back to the past. Maybe they could have done, you know, a little bit of Sword of Rotoria 13 in terms of doing the past details for Lafia in part 3, but again, it's something that's covered in Sword of Rotoria 13, you know. I don't think that would have made much sense whatsoever, because we know Sword of Rotoria 13 tackles Lafia heavily, and it obviously delves into her past a little bit as well. It wouldn't have made much sense of taking a lot of that and putting it in part 3 as well. So for me, part 3 was, if they had done it where part 1 and part 2 was SO12, part 3 being something else entirely wouldn't have made much sense to me whatsoever. So for me, it was never likely to happen. I think I kind of accepted that fact, and I was looking forward to seeing what they would have added on top of the story, to be quite honest, more so than anything else. The problem with SO12, right, and why they can't expand it more than they could have, or more than they did, I should say, why couldn't they expand more than they did, is primarily because we have to remember that this is a story where basically we're dealing with a lot of fight scenes. We're dealing with a lot of fight scenes and a lot of action sequences, right? And there's only so much you can do with the action sequences, to be quite honest. There's only so much you can do with the action sequences. So for me, I don't think they could have dragged it out as much as, you know, maybe we expected, to be quite honestly. I was expecting a little bit more exposition on, you know, what Belle and the Hestia Familia did a little bit more in detail, along with the Freya Familia. Maybe I think that would have been cool, but unfortunately it doesn't seem like they're going down that direction. Instead, we're pretty much getting a one-to-one representation of exactly what happened in the light novel in this adaptation as well, in terms of the dialogue is pretty much the same and everything. And that brings me to the adaptation. What did I think about the part 2 adaptation? I liked it. I think overall it was very, very well done. The voice acting was fantastic. The lines were translated perfectly from the light novel into the game itself. I don't think there was any issues on that front whatsoever. And overall, the lines that they added to each character, because this is what I'm talking about when it comes to the adaptation, is I'm talking about the general adaptation of, you know, what is, you know, copy pasted exactly from the light novel to the game, and what lines they added for a little bit more exposition, you know, obviously not being able to carry forward all the descriptive words of what people are thinking and everything, and how are they translating that into the game adaptation. And I think they've done a fantastic job so far. The descriptions, the mental sort of like monologues that characters are having, like for example in this chapter and in this part, we had Lily's monologue as well at a certain point, and it was well done. I think it was extremely well done. I think it was well handled, and overall that was exactly what we kind of needed, in all honesty. I think we needed that to be at least successful at the very least, because, you know, at the end of the day, this is a Sword of Rotoria 12 adaptation. The aim of the 6th anniversary is to adapt SO12, and I think they're doing a good job on that front at the very least, you know. The voice acting great, the additional lines brilliant. I'm still mentioning it again, coming in from part 1 into part 2, I really like the references that we have to you know, Knights of Fianna and Argonaut, as well as the Great Feud. I think those are some things that, you know, you tend to take granted for, but it all links up really, really well, and that's what I really like. You know, I really like when they try and link up everything and do it in a nice, not overly sort of like smothering way. They're not doing it in the they're not doing it in a smothering way, but they're doing it in a nice, subtle, but not necessarily completely subtle, because you see the images blown up in your face and everything, and they're literally talking about those historical figures, but they are doing it in a way that it's not overbearing. It's there for a split second, and then you're coming out of it. Basically, you're out of it and you're moving on to the next sequence. So I think that is done extremely well. Now, I want to come on to the original sequences because I think that's the main points we need to talk about. The two main original sequences, one of which is this. So, the first scene is a scene that I kind of wish was in the light novel, and it isn't in the light novel, and it's the sequences above Orario, on the, well, I say above Orario, the on the ground level of Orario, not underground, not in the dungeon or Gnosis. This is on the ground level of Orario, and this is what I wanted to see in the light novel as well, because they had it for like 3 or 4 pages, basically a little bit more. I might be underestimating it, but they did do like about 4 or 5 pages of explaining like what the adventures that are still remaining on the overground, what they're doing, what are the people from Melon helping out with, you know, Njord Familia, Kali Familia, and then of course you have the guild, what are they trying to do to help out. I think, you know, the light novels gave a little bit of a description, but they rapidly went back down into the dungeon immediately. Like they just went back down into the dungeon to you know, show the backup and, you know, what happened when the Freya familia joined the fray, what happens when the Hestia familia joins the fray, and everything. So that's what they did in the light novel. But here, instead of going back into the dungeon, we instead come back into the overground for a little bit longer than you know, what it should have been based on the light novel. And instead we get to see the hostess of fertility along with Argana and Bosch basically you know, taking on some of the flowers on the overground and helping protect the civilians of Orario, with the citizens of Orario, those who aren't adventurers and stuff. So you see you know, Chloe Lunor, as well as you know, I think it was Anya as well, you know, taking care and helping out as well. And then you see Mia joining the fray, and this is where we got the Mia unit from, basically. And I think this is a nice touch, because what this is, more so than anything else, in my personal opinion, I think it's a combination of a couple of things, right? It's first and foremost, it shows us what happened overground, because you have to expect that, you know, adventurers like the you know, the hostess of fertility members, Mia, the barmaids, Chloe, Lunor, and Anya, along with a lot of the adventurers, they were trying to help protect as much as Orario as much as possible, and help protect the civilians. But at the same time, the second thing I really like, that, and the reason why I think they did this and included this sequence more so than anything else, is because Mia in Danmemo hasn't had the opportunity to shine whatsoever, and I feel like this is a very nice way to do so, especially as we come to an end of new Danmemo stories, and considering there is no other opportunity for us to get a new Mia unit, because, you know, if you look at the other stories, Mia doesn't play a massive role. She does play a role in some stories, like A Winter's Magic Miracle and a couple of other stories. She does play a role in those stories, but she doesn't play a massive role. So we end up not seeing Mia in a position like this, where she's actually fighting and being the aggressor, or, you know, fighting against monsters. So I think that, you know, them doing it here, because of course, like I said, since we're not going to be getting any further adaptations or events, we wouldn't have be able to see Mia being a fighter, and I'm glad that we managed to do so. And I think this section was very smooth. It was very, very smooth, very well handled, because it just goes straight in. It's exact. You would think that it was basically removed from the light novel because of page constraints, but it was originally there. You would think that it was in the original drafts, but they decided to remove it because of a page constraint issue or something along those lines. The editor must have said that, bro, Mori sensei, maga, you know, we've got too many pages here, you got to delete some things, you know. And this is probably one of those things that was probably in the drafts, and they decided to bring it into the into Danmemo, because why not? You know, Danmemo needs it, especially for part 2. They desperately needed this, honestly. So I think it was well done. I really, really like the fact that they brought in Mia. I really like the fact that they had the overground stuff, because it was absolutely necessary, in my personal opinion. And it was something that just added a little bit of taste to the overall story, because again, it shows another facet of the fight that was happening underground, but instead of being underground, it's what was happening overground, you know, the after effects, or the effects happening during the fight. It wasn't necessarily after effects because it's still ongoing, but it's the ongoing effects of what's happening underground and how is it affecting the above ground. You know, this is the reason why we had a situation where unfortunately they said that, oh, you know, nobody overground would find out about this whole mission and everything, but then, you know, you have this happening basically on the overground basically. Kali, of course, trying to scout for talent as well, tries to get Mia to join her and tells Kira and stuff, which is very, very funny. But we move along. So that was one scene, and it shows some small things as well here, because it shows that Mia can absolutely demolish Organa in one punch. She literally knocks her, well, doesn't knock her out, but she just punches her away in one hit, literally. And it goes to show how strong Mia is. It's something that we still don't even know in the light novels entirely, you know, her skills and everything, but we just know now based on this, and obviously since this is supervised by Mori Sensei, we can get an idea of her Mia's strength at least. Obviously we don't know if this would actually happen or whatnot, but we can kind of get an estimate of how strong Mia truly is, which again I think is a nice touch. It's a very, very nice touch. It adds into the background of Mia as being an ex-captain of the Freya Familia, right? So IMO, fantastic. I think this was brilliant. This was absolutely brilliant. But let's move along now and move to some other scenes in the later sections of the story. So like I said, I really liked what they did as well, with the Astrea stuff and whatnot. Again, we were cheering our boy Astreas during the live stream. It was very, very, very fun, to be quite honest, especially as Lid was just like, let's not tell him that Belle's around, bro, otherwise he's just gonna go on another rampage again. And then of course we see this sequence where Lily is having her internal monologue. Again, I really like this sequence a lot. I liked it in the light novels as well, but I think it was well expanded in the game as well, with the additional lines and everything. I think it was super well done, super well done on that front as well. But let's talk about the big one. Obviously before we started getting to, or before part 2 started, I should say. I don't know why I struggled there, but before part 2 started, and when we were getting the teasers and everything on Tuesday in the live stream, when we had the live stream dropping all the information, we saw a sequence where Belle basically said, you are alive, and this was in Japanese. Then when we logged in for the first time during part 2's drop, right, there you know how there's always an intro scene in Danmemo. So we saw some of the scenes from the starting section, and then we saw the same scene with Belle, and he said, so you survived. And at that point I still didn't know who it was. I was still very, very confused as to who it was. I think a lot of the communities were thinking about it. A lot of you guys actually guess some people. A lot of you guys were saying like Dix, some of you guys were saying maybe Zord and Althea, and some of you guys were saying Artemis. So a lot of people were thinking it was one of those characters basically. So first and foremost, I don't think it would have been Zord and Althea, as cool as it would have been. It was very unlikely because Zord and Althea, Belle doesn't know them, so it wouldn't have made much sense on that front. Artemis was possible, but I think it was very unlikely because it would have been the third time they would have brought her around, right? And the second time they would have just made her alive once again somehow, some way. Dix, on the other hand, I thought was the likeliest option. I thought that it would have been a little bit boring, but I think it would have been the likeliest option at the same time, because it just made sense in terms of the fact that, well, they can bring him back alive. It's fine. But the Japanese community was thinking about somebody else. Somebody mentioned it to me in my live stream actually that day, that the Japanese community was thinking of somebody else entirely. And I didn't think about it myself. I didn't think about it at all, because I thought that, oh, he's non-canon. Them meeting, Belle and this character meeting, is non-canon. It happened during a Danmemo event, and that was it. And this Danmemo event took place over 4 years ago, 5 years ago nearly, actually. I think at the end of this year it would be 5 years since that event happened. But Amori Sensei said, that's what I'm actually going to do. And instead of Dix, we got Vito. This is a shocker to me. This was a shocker to me. When I found out about it, it was a shocker for me. Now, I will say this. I wasn't expecting it, first and foremost, because like I said, I thought, it's non-canon. Surely there's no way that they could bring this guy in back again and make him meet Belle, right? Because that would mean that that event is canon. That Christmas event is technically canon for the Danmemo story. Not for Danmachi as a whole, but for the Danmemo storyline, it is actually canon. And I was like, nah, they wouldn't do that. No. I think they'll bring somebody else back in. It can't be Vito necessarily. But turns out I was wrong. I was absolutely a mile off, and it's actually Vito. When I found out, and I found out because I got spoiled, thanks Twitter, by the way, appreciate you for that. I just got it on my For You page, and I was like, well, damn it. All right then. And it was unfortunate because I would have loved to see it, live and react to it live, completely blind going in. I'm gonna try and avoid all social media when we do the next part's reaction, especially if there's any major hint or teaser as well, especially, right? I'm gonna try and avoid it as much as possible. But I kind of got spoiled about this in all honesty, and it's kind of disappointing because I would love to, like I said, I would have loved to live react to it, first time round, and I would have been like, oh my god, it's actually canon. A Winter's Magic Miracle is canon. And for those of you guys who don't know what a Winter's Magic Miracle is, it's a event that happened in Danmemo about 5 years ago, Christmas 2018, and it basically it was a story of Belle and Seer finding a little girl. Her name was Noelle, and she was basically a big plot point for the entire story. And we of course got our first look at Vito then as well. I think that was the first time we saw Vito in the story as well. And effectively they fought and they've met each other before, and so it was like, oh, Belle beat Vito back then, and so it was absolutely fine. And it was like a big shocker. Even Belle is so completely shocked at this point in time. Vito back then was level 4, Belle was only level 2, I think, at the time of that story. And now both of them are meeting one another on equal footing, basically level 4 together, basically, both Vito and Belle. And they go into a little bit of a backstory. They show these small sequences and stuff. I highly recommend the story, by the way. This is probably my favorite Danmachi story that's not an anniversary event or an adaptation. I love A Winter's Magic Miracle. It's my favorite story. It is by and far away my favorite story. So highly recommend it if you haven't already read it. Unfortunately, if you are playing on EU, I think, unfortunately there is no story for this, sadly. So I think what you guys will have to do is probably just go on YouTube and check. I think there should be one. A Winter's Magic Miracle is what it is. So let's take a look and see. Yeah, Mediocre has got it. I would highly recommend going and checking it out. It is a fantastic story, and it's something you guys could probably go and check out and get an idea on. So big shout outs to Mediocre for having uploaded this about 3 years ago. We miss you, buddy. We miss you. He's gone. He's disappeared. But Gacha Ampas has come in his place, of course, right? He's come in his place. But yes, like I said, Winter's Magic Miracle, a fantastic story, and Vito coming into this was a bit of a surprise to me. Now, what do I think about it? The way he described it and everything about how he was going from familiar to familiar, he after the Great Feud and everything, and of course the events of A Winter's Magic Miracle, how he was jumping from familiar to familiar, getting the blessing of a god as much as possible, no matter whatever familiar it was, from whatever god/goddess it was. And he was still interested in basically listening to Ennio in this situation, because again, Vito has had this agenda of basically breaking down the world for a long period of time. And for me, I think I don't know. I feel like a lot of people may not like it because they may feel it's tacked on, and I can see that, in terms of it being somewhat tacked on in a way, to be quite honest. But I feel like at the same time, it is a nice addition, and it is an addition that honestly made the most sense out of everything that we thought. Of course, he refers to Erebus as well here. But considering all things said and done, considering everything that's happened already, and I don't think it should have been Dix because he got absolutely destroyed, right? And then of course, we had we had the options of Zard and Althea, which wouldn't have made sense whatsoever. We had Artemis as well. Zeus was also being brought up as well, I think, by some people. But for me, none of the options made any sense. Whereas Vito, I think, makes some sense. I think it could have been there were not many options based on this sequence, but I think Vito made sense. Now, in terms of how they executed it, right, it is nice because it gives obviously Bell an extra challenge while he's obviously trying to help out the other familiars and everything. It adds in an extra factor rather than it just being the six spirits and everything. And of course, Ice fighting Revis and Lufia fighting Ain/Filvis, right? Instead of it just being that, it's also the fact of Bell having to take down Vito to progress on and to try and help the rest of the familiars out, right? And so, to me, I like the addition. And one thing that happened at the end, and now I want to talk about the culmination, because I think the exposition and the fight sequences and stuff, I think was done well. I think overall it was done well. The Bell and Vito fight sequence, of course, they referred to Bell's arm that was still recovering, the left arm that was still recovering, and then of course they wanted to talk about, also all the evilist stuff and everything. And now this is a section that I wasn't expecting as well. Again, it doubled up as well. Now, I'm not gonna lie, at this point during the live stream, I absolutely forgot that Vito was colorblind. I'm not gonna lie. I remembered it the moment somebody mentioned it in chat, and when they mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, he was colorblind. I completely forgot. Obviously, it's because I haven't read a Stray record in nearly 3 years, not since the 3rd anniversary. I wanted to read it when we had the rerun happen, but I completely didn't have the time to do so. I was swamped with essays and stuff, as well as, preparing for Battle Chronicle and everything. But at the same time, I just completely forgot. So they brought it back up. Bell brought it back up because then he refers to Radari, who of course is from the Winter's Reverie Tale, which means that the second Christmas event, the Christmas 2019 event, I think it was 2019, is also canon. I don't know. So apparently they've had like 2 Christmases in the span of 6 months. I don't know. That's the only thing I was just like, really? Okay, Danmachi, I see you, Omori Sensei. I see you. Sure, you want to do double Christmas events, I suppose. Fine, fair enough. But yeah, obviously, Bell is referring to Vito's vision, his color blindness, of course, where he can see things in gray and obviously some in red. And then they actually converted as well to gray and black and white as well here, as well, which is very, very interesting. And basically at this point, Bell goes into a little bit of a talk no jutsu point, effectively is the best way to put it. He goes into a little bit of a talk no jutsu point. He beats Vito first and foremost. He takes down Vito, but he also basically goes into a bit of a talk no jutsu, like, if we win this fight, you will give up, all right? You will live up to justice if we succeed. So it kind of ended up in a talk no jutsu sort of section, which is very interesting, but it also is going to be very interesting to see how this will affect part 3, because I do feel like this will have an effect on part 3 of the story. And this is the reason why I feel like they couldn't have made too many more changes. A lot of people were like, well, part 2 is only 11 chapters, they could have added a lot more, right? Well, the problem with adding more is that you have to also then adapt the rest of the parts to accommodate for those additions and changes that you have included, because usually, when it's a straightforward story without any changes, well, it's, going to end the same. But the moment you start adding changes, you have to accommodate for those changes, right? And that's the reason why I wasn't expecting too many changes. But with this being introduced and everything, unlike the Mia one, where it was like, okay, that can be a part of the story and it not have a major effect on the ending, right? But this sort of sequence where Vito is alive and kicking, and apparently, if the ending is positive, which, considering all endings, it should be positive, what does Vito do then? What is Vito's role in everything here, basically? Is he going to be a good guy? Is he going to be a bad guy again? Or what is going to be? Is he going to just live in a corner of Arario, you know, seeing Bell become a hero? Or what's the situation here, right? So for me, that's going to be very interesting to see how they execute it in part 3. But overall, this was a nice surprise in a way, where it was just like, it's a cool addition. It's a cool way of making certain stories canon from the Danmemo events tab effectively. And it's picking up from 2 really good stories, of course, right? Both Christmas stories are fantastic. And so as a result, I think that, you know, them taking it from those stories is also very, very positive. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Did you guys like it? Do you guys think that it was a little bit unnecessary? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please be sure to leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel for more Danmachi and Danmachi Memoria Freese content. But yes, I really enjoyed this story. I cannot wait to see what part 3 brings up, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. Do you guys like it? Did you guys dislike it? Let me know. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take it easy, everybody. Bye bye.